Hello. Okay, so it's another rambly one where I'm trying to get my thoughts in order about what is the next step to take. It's not based on reading again, this time it's based on trying to get a proposal together and the need to create a title, a research question that has longevity and purpose and enough flexibility within it for adaptation. Should the research lead me down another area of investigation, it still needs to be able to answer the question that I set from the start. So I have a list of a few questions, and I may be going through more than one just now, but there's one in particular I want to address. I want to go through every part of it and maybe pass it out a little, change some of the wording, and consider its appropriateness for where I'm applying. A lot of the phraseology I'm putting into it is derived from both the wording of the particular grant I'm applying for and what the requirements are there, and for the supervisor I've hopefully identified as taking me on for this one, although I'm not yet certain if that particular person will be taking this or will be willing to take this, but I think so. Everything I've read about this person says they're currently accepting proposals. And my research area, based on this question, is within the scope of the proposal this person is accepting. So, fingers crossed. So the question I am currently looking at pitching. Can emerging moving image technologies and platforms help integrate media pedagogy into secondary education curriculums? So let me babble a bit first about my basic ideas about that question, and then let's go through the wording of it and explore if it's the right wording and if it's appropriate. So my basic idea is that I'm trying to find a research area that I'm qualified to be the person that should be doing this research. There are many other areas I'd like to research, but I find it hard to justify why I'm the person to do that particular research. But this question speaks a lot to my history as a person who's worked in film and education and sort of straddled that line a little bit in life, and done so in such a way that it's not to either end. I'm covering that with a finger on there, I'm aware of that, sorry. I've not done that to an extent where I'm the pinnacle of professionalism in either industry. In education, I've been working mainly as support staff with a teaching face, but a specialist in the knowledge rather than a qualified teacher. And within the media, I've been working as a amateur/freelance practitioner, creating things on a small to micro budget basis, or no budget basis in some cases, and working on commission for things like charities. So I've not been working in huge big crews. I've not been working on things that many people have seen. What I have been working on are things on very small, tight-knit crews. I've used a varying scope of equipment from whatever's in my pocket at the time, through the SLR industry that we see having emerged through things like YouTube and the facilitation of anyone can make a film ideology, and then through right to high-end cameras. I've worked with Epic at the time, I think it was, and similarly with editing platforms. And that editing platforms is one area, in fact, where I think I have a strength to explore this idea, because that is very much both the area of my teaching in many cases and the area of my practice. I've worked many times in editing for people and for myself in whichever platforms are required. Usually I work in Premiere. Often I've had to work in Avid. I've had a brief dabble with Resolve, but I've similarly followed projects through on much lighter weight platforms or software rather, applications. I've used iMovie and Windows Movie Maker and that Sony one, whose name I can't remember because I didn't like it very much. Can't remember what that's called. And that new Adobe one, Rush, which I actually really quite like. It's quite a light version of editing, but it is very obviously made by people who edit a lot and know what is needed by a fast-paced but practicing editor. Anyway, that's a digression and a half. So I feel very comfortable that I am the person to conduct this kind of research because I have experience of teaching media and practicing media, and I'm hoping this question is clearly bridging the two together. And the reason for my thinking of this question is that in my experience, anecdotally so far, and I'm finding research to back this up, I've already got some great statistics to back this up, that media is not really taught to a very high number of people, certainly at all prior to secondary education. Within secondary education, it's a low number, and in further education, it's still a fairly low number. It's lower, in fact, meaning that by the time students arrive at university, only a small fraction of those people have probably studied media before. Now, the reason that I feel that this is relevant and important is that we live in an age and a society in which media is so pervasive and so part of our everyday life, and we're not taught the skills we maybe need to both understand the authorship of the content around us and to produce our own. It's a pathway to many careers now, but it is not part of our education in the same way that in maybe a few decades before, I remember studying woodworking as part of my core curriculum at middle school. And I imagine that once upon a time, that was a great avenue into work. However, I'm not so sure that's really true now. And I wonder how much a middle school or a primary school would be involving woodwork and should be thinking about involving digital media, moving image creation, anything to do with the society that the children are growing up in and interacting with. Importantly, I was studying woodworking at a time when I never interacted with woodworking either before, during, or after studying it. However, if we taught kids digital media skills now, they are living in a world where they've certainly encountered digital media before. They went to school. I know countless parents, frustratingly, who put a tablet in front of toddlers to subdue them, albeit a tablet without any access for said toddler to explore with, should they even know how to do that. It's just like Peppa Pig on Netflix or something on a child account. During their education, they will certainly be starting to move towards the idea of social media, engaging with the people they're at school with, and following that content creation. The participatory nature of our applications now, like YouTube, like TikTok, like WhatsApp, not so much WhatsApp, but like Snapchat, Instagram, we're a creative-based digital media society, and we're not preparing in our school system, as far as I'm aware, and this is where this research is, I think, valuable because it identifies the skills gap and knowledge gaps, both within myself and within the system. Perhaps there is education there, but what gaps is it failing to meet? What is it not preparing us for, if it is there? We're not preparing students to live in the world that we're living in. We're preparing them with core skills. English, math, science, always going to be useful. English gives us our analytical and critical skills, as well as an understanding of literature and text as art, and art being more than what you study in art class. Science, I don't see any argument for that subduing itself anytime soon. We really need that, maybe now more than ever. And math, I mean, we're not going to do science without math, right? And so many aspects of life require it. I mean, if people are going to go on to study engineering, I'm not defending the core subjects any further, because they don't need defending. They are core subjects for a reason. However, the core subjects probably can all include elements of what we're talking about here, and other subjects slightly outside the core. Art particularly, I think, gives us an avenue for exploring digital media. If we're preparing kids for careers, then we should also imbue them with an awareness that digital media and social platforms are an avenue for those careers. And art is certainly one of those. There are artistic opportunities in these digital media that maybe aren't explored at school level, and maybe aren't really explored at all unless you're on a very carefully curated university course which considers those things. I certainly don't remember in my time at university, at undergrad or masters, being told digital and social media is an avenue for you to practice your artistic career endeavors. Within film, for sure, I felt like my training in film was being targeted towards the industry of film for broadcast television or festival or cinema released film. I don't remember anyone ever saying, you know, there's great advertising revenue on YouTube if you have a successful series on there. They did give me the skills to utilize should I stray into that path, but they didn't prepare me for how to get into that path. Thinking of university courses that have paths to industry and the collaborations they have, there are some digital media representation on there, like Netflix, and there's an idea that your production skills can go that way. But there's still, I don't know, there doesn't seem to be a lot talking about the freelance entrepreneurship of approaching digital media as a platform. And in fact, in some ways, it feels a little hush-hush and kind of looked down upon. Like, don't put your stuff on YouTube. Whereas a platform like Vimeo gets a lot of attention because it seems more professional for some reason. That's another potential area for this research. So ultimately, I'm asking this question because I want to see how we can implement a more practical-based and useful aspect of education that has media and moving image at its core. And I'm feeling like it's a multidisciplinary idea. It's not about going into school and saying, you need to create a curriculum around digital media. I feel like it's about incorporating elements of digital media into other curriculums to find subjects like English lends itself to it because it feeds into media, art, music, drama, potentially science a bit. There's elements of engineering there, and engineering goes beyond just physical world engineering now. We're engineering into a digital age. And speaking of which, ICT for sure has avenues for exploring this too, and probably is one area I should research heavily because I imagine that does, although I don't remember from any time of any of my time working in a high school of ICT crossing towards media at all. Business studies did a little, much more on the market and communication side, but still, that's something about which we're talking here. So there's definitely opportunities to keep this quite broadly across a multidisciplinary disciplinary spectrum within secondary school, I would say. I think primary school is maybe pushing it. I'd see it being quite challenging there to engage such a young audience with an idea of authorship, an idea of message in communication, or even practice in terms of making their own thing beyond just a very basic, cool, you made a film, well done, because, I mean, that's a very young age. And there are more important lessons and primers for high school, for secondary school, for these ages to be involved with, get them ready for further education with other subjects, make an awareness that other subjects have a depth to them and that they have the basic skills like reading and writing and arithmetic to pursue them once they get there. I don't think at that stage saying, you know, you live in a digital society, you should be ready for that. I don't think that's too important because if the age restrictions work on the social platforms and ages below 13 don't get to access them, then there's no need for it. However, I know that's an ideal utopian sense in that many, many, many children do access them well before the age of 13, and there are easy ways to get around that. I mean, it asks for your birthday right at the start. Just put in a different birthday, guys. It's that simple. But yeah, I think we're looking at secondary really here. Secondary or high if we're staying local in the Northeast. So let's go through the wording. Can emerging moving image, stop there, emerging moving image. Moving image, I feel, is a very important phrase in there for the reasons of where I'm pitching this. I'm a film academic primarily. That's what my areas of study have been. If I start talking about social media without talking about moving image, it quickly moves away from this being an area of study that I have qualification in, that I have prior knowledge of. Moving image is absolutely where I'm most comfortable, but I haven't said film because I want to keep this open to not just film as it's understood or taught. I don't want this to be about a cinema study, about preparing people for cinema scholarship or for TV production. I want this to be about all aspects of moving image, which relates to what I was saying about how I don't recall any examples of being told within any particular curriculum that this is a career opportunity, that there are digital platforms out there for you to upload your things, that you can make money by having something become successful online, that you can be franchised by creative content that you've produced. So moving image, emerging moving image technologies and platforms. So emerging and technologies and platforms are a particular phraseology that belong together. Then moving image is just sandwiched between them to make sure it's within the right area. So emerging technologies and platforms. This is, in a sense, future-proofing, although that is a word I'm hesitant to use because I don't want to imply that this is a be-all and end-all study that sets out a template for the future and it will always be relevant. I don't believe that to be true at all. However, I do want this research to feel like it's setting up a framework which can be adapted and expanded regardless of platforms. So I'm not saying, how can YouTube be used? How can TikTok be used? Because in however many years, they might not be there anymore, or something might be more relevant, or technology might have shifted to such an extent that they just don't have appropriateness anymore. So emerging moving image technologies and platforms is a way of saying, how can we educate people to always have a sense of what's relevant to them? And how can we create a framework in which we recognize the things of the day as well as the trends, and by trends I mean things that have more longevity than just being like, oh, this is popular right now. I mean, like, YouTube has a trend of being popular over many years. So not just emerging moving image technologies, but no, that's a problem then, isn't it? So maybe not just emerging and existing, or maybe I should just change that to existing, or existing and emerging. Let me make a little note. Okay, this has been useful already. This is why we do these. Emerging. Existing. Okay. I'm not going to rewrite this question yet, but that is a great point for me to now consider. So, how do emerging moving image technologies and platforms? I've distinguished between technologies and platforms because I think it's important to say there are tools you can use in the classroom, like, let's think about my day teaching media first of all. Small digital video cameras, DSLRs, laptops, quite powerful, quite compact computers, easy to wield lighting, LED panels, very cheap, small, lightweight tripods. Jumping forward a bit more, smartphones, tablets, anything with a camera on it. There are technologies available to bring into a classroom that enable this style of teaching. Platforms, much more thinking about apps, hosting sites, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, things that allow us to not only create content using technology, but to share content and compare content using technology. There is an obvious child protection and ethical consideration to be made around here, which will be part of the proposal I'm writing. We're putting kids on the internet, essentially. We need to find safe ways of doing that. But I think the distinction between technologies and platforms is important because we need to recognize that these things are available in classroom, these things are available to the world. How do the two come together, and how can we wield them to improve our pedagogy, to improve our teaching? Yeah, I feel happy with that. Can emerging moving image technologies and platforms help integrate media pedagogy? So this refers to what I was saying about this being multidisciplinary and not disruptive and not requiring a whole new curriculum or a new area of study. Integration into existing subjects, media learning, media awareness built into existing curriculums and used appropriately for those systems. In art, we're talking about artistic avenues of self-publishing, of revenue generation, of advertising your skills. In business, we're talking about marketing and communication and how big businesses will use Snapchat and a Snapchat story to advertise themselves, to have a brand awareness that goes directly towards a person's smartphone. It's in your hand, a business's advertisement. There's YouTube advertisements as well, obviously, with the whole culture of the 5-second skippable advert now. You know, get in your advertising message within 5 seconds and then have a longer version of it, should it not be skipped. Integrated into secondary education. I've already discussed why I don't believe primary is the place for this. I also think, though, that this needs to be pre-university and pre-A-level. It needs to go before further education. I have some documents from the BFI with a whole bunch of statistics, which are highly relevant to this. And it actually frightened me a lot this morning reading it, because I started on like 2018. It was the first one I came across, and then I managed to get hold of a set of them ranging from, I think, 2016 up to this year, last year rather, and it's 2021 now, isn't it? Up to 2020. And there's been a consistent downturn in media studies at GCSE and at A-level in England. There's been a slight uptake in Northern Ireland, which is encouraging, but they have very small numbers to start with, and the uptake on those numbers is not as significant as the drop in the English version. And in Wales, it's a similar pattern. Again, it's like the Northern Irish numbers. They're very small numbers compared to the English ones. So statistically and as percentages, maybe, or as percentages, that's neither here nor there. But statistically, not as notable as the changes in the English one, but that's on a downward trend as well. So it's really scary to think that although we're in this world where media is becoming more and more pervasive and more integral to our lives and offers more and more opportunities as well as more dangers, less and less people in this country, at least, are studying media, are actively choosing to become aware of the things around them. Hopefully this signifies an idea that there is already existing media education in other subjects, and that's the reason for the downturn, that we're much more media aware in different places and we don't feel the need to pursue media studies because we're already receiving that education. But that needs investigation, that needs confirmation, that can't just be assumed. At A-level, it's a similar downward turn in media studies, and I would argue that that again is hopefully the same reason, but needs investigation. What I would say with my personal experience of media studies is that if you are going to go on to do film, that is an absolutely fantastic start. So hopefully the core, and there has been a bit of a core because the downward trend of uptake in A-level has frozen over the last year, or if not frozen, at least not declined at the rate it has been over the last few years. There's a very significant, a very tiny decline between last year and the year before, suggesting it's actually plateaued at a low number a little bit. And I would assume that the core, that base that it's reached, is because the number of people studying media has shed the people that would like to study media because they live in a media society and there's a lot of media around them, but retain the people that are interested specifically in film or photography. But that's completely anecdotal. That's based on my experience of an A-level syllabus for media, which is now actually out of date because they changed the syllabus just as I finished. So it would be interesting to see how uptake changes over the next couple of years, in fact, and maybe that's part of the reason for the sudden pause and decline. Maybe the syllabus is got a higher retention rate now, or a higher appeal and we'll maybe start seeing a climb again. I assume 2020 has changed a lot in terms of what statistics are going to do over the next couple of years, though. Uptake in any form of education is going to be a bit of a struggle. University application towards media and film, according to this BFI document, is very steady, incredibly steady, which is troubling when you compare that with the media GCSE and A-level uptake, because less and less people are actually media savvy by the time they go to study film, if that's is entirely true. Which means that university courses, and I think I said this in the last video, university courses have to cater to a wide audience of people who are probably completely unskilled in that area by the time they arrive. If a media uptake was higher, there's less chance of a university having to do that. There's more ability for a university to focus on other aspects of what they're teaching, not just starting at zero. That's about accelerating people into industry, I would say, at that point. But there's investigation to be done there whether that's true. So back to the question, though, integrated into secondary education. So I think that's why my facts and figures really help out this title, and in fact the research going forward. Secondary education is where we can see the significance of media education. And then just to bring that all together, that last part of the sentence, because the last word is curriculums. Integrate media pedagogy into secondary education curriculums, and that's just again sandwiching the bit in the middle. Integrate and curriculums belong together there. We don't want to start a new curriculum. We want to just go into existing curriculums in other subjects and add and facilitate and integrate into what they have. So this is really hopefully presenting a question that is non-disruptive to existing educational structures, but adaptive, and helps the cause of having a much more media savvy and aware set of young people from every industry, essentially, so that we can walk towards a future where we are so inundated with media like we currently are, but we're absolutely prepared for it, and we're able to not just withstand it, but contribute to it. It's a sharing culture with interactive media. What's the term I'm looking for, Nick? Participatory media. We want to build participants in that. We want to build savvy participants who are able to thrive in that environment. So that feels to me like the strongest question, although it does feel difficult to pitch that to a university film department and start talking about pedagogy, but I'm not sure where that really belongs. You need to be a specialist in one of those two areas, and to get into a film department and find one member of staff who is a specialist in those two areas is quite challenging. The place I'm looking at doesn't have that. We have a person who is kind of a specialist in that area, but with the traditional arts, with the fine arts, rather than film. So I feel like I won't be pitching to that person because well, I'm hesitating on justifying it because, but I feel like I need a film specialist really with this one, because I'm talking about moving image. I'm talking about those things that are out there. The things I want to integrate into education with this question are not things that really fine art utilizes much of. There is moving image that is used in art, in traditional art, in fine art, in presenting a space, in having a moving image as an art piece. Art film is a term that exists, but the person I have elected to pitch this to is quite specialist in art film as well. And when I say quite specialist, it's because the rest of their canon is moving image based. If art film is only one facet of it, the rest of the other facets are moving image at least. And that means I have a much stronger ability to identify with that person's advice, and they have a stronger ability, hopefully, to identify with my ideas and guide me. That's what I'm after all, with a supervisor, is a guide, getting through this question. So that feels strongest. Perhaps that art person with the history of integrating pedagogy and arts would be a great secondary supervisor, someone who I can draw on ideas and for further guidance on the other side of this question, on the non-moving image side of this. But I also think perhaps it would be better to see if I can find someone from just educational teaching, someone who runs a PGCE. That's for consideration. I feel that's the strongest. So I'll briefly talk through the other questions, but I'm not going to dissect them as much. So the second one is quite similar to the first. It's trying to achieve roughly the same thing. It's just different wording entirely. Does media education belong in earlier phases of education? And can emerging technologies and platforms facilitate its introduction? This question I wrote down just after thinking about this first one and whether or not it's appropriate to place this kind of education into primary. I was thinking, why have I assumed secondary is the place for this? But the more and more I've gone over this first question, the more and more I believe that no, the answer is really that media education doesn't really belong so much in that earlier phase of education as in primary, but does belong in that education phase at secondary. So if I'm saying earlier phase of education is pre-university or even pre-A-level, the answer is yes to that, I would say. If it's primary, I would say no. Now, there is potential, I think, to research that question and to spend a long time debating that. And there's probably literature out there for me to explore. But I feel comfortable in defending the placement of secondary education in the question that I have elected for. Next, does participatory media require earlier media pedagogy? Similar idea. Is my first question too assumptive about it needing to be in education? Again, I think I'm able to justify that it needs to be there, that it should be there, that there are so many avenues. And part of my research is to, I think, focus on the potentials of media, of moving image media in its participatory capacity, and how it fits into education in different ways, to identify those different subjects that have different routes to use participatory media. So again, I don't think that one really is a long-term research question anyway. I think that's an essay. So maybe I will be writing on that. Next, how to easily deploy media training in schools to prepare for and protect against participatory media. So this is very much like the first in its assumption that it's going into schools. But how to do that, how to deploy it in schools. So it's not necessarily about integration, but it's investigating whether integration out of one strategy is the best strategy, or should there be a specific media course, or should students be made to do workshops, or should there just be an occasional assembly where the whole school has to listen to someone spouting the dangers and benefits of participatory media. Again, I mean, that is more than an essay question. There is a good area of practical research to be done there, but I feel that could form part of my research as going under that primary question to investigate if emerging moving image technology and platforms can help integrate into education, then a question I should be asking just before that point is how to easily deploy the training. In formulating a workshop, or essentially, because that's what I'm thinking, to get technologies into schools, or to get them integrated into curriculums even. How do I do that? How do I get them into schools? How do I make schools feel like this is appealing? It's not disruptive to their work. It's not increasing their work, but it is beneficial and something they should adopt. How do I do that? And last, what is the best way to implement media awareness and training in secondary age students? It's pretty similar. Yeah, that's really similar to the question that just came before it. I think the phraseology of it, though, is because I reacted a little bit to protect in the question before it, how to prepare for and protect against participatory media. I'm a little bit conscious of trying to keep this as a positive in everyone's eyes that encounters the research, of thinking this is something that's building people up towards careers and towards engagement and activity. And I'm trying to detract away from the idea of fear, that we have this participatory media and this technology in young people's hands that is predatory and awful and exposes them to things that we wouldn't like them to be exposed to at that age. That is a commentary that exists in a lot of journalism and a lot of academic papers as well. And there's, again, a scope for literature for me to find to talk at either point of that. But this last question, I think it's essentially the same as the one that came before it. I'm just trying to take out that protect, to remove that element of media fear, essentially. But it's particularly targeting secondary age students at that point. It's not just saying training in schools. So it's gone a little bit back to the assumptions of the very first question, in that this kind of training doesn't really belong in primary, that we need students of a certain age because that's when it's going to become important to them. So let's leave this video here. There, it's a long one, but that's been really helpful, especially thinking about that word emerging. And I've really, I think, solidified my feelings about that first question being appropriate. Cool. Cheers.